Welcome to today's program titled Conducting Remote Investigations, Considerations and Best Practices for Employers in the COVID-19 Environment. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. For those of you who are logged in to the web presentation, you are encouraged to submit questions throughout the conference by typing them into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. For those interested in obtaining CLE credit for this webinar, an attendance verification code will be read during the presentation that will be required on the CLE attendance affirmation form. Please write this code down as it will not be reread and is required for CLE credit. Copies of the webinar recording and materials, along with the CLE attendance form, will be distributed to attendees in the days following the webinar. On the next slide, you will see a legal disclaimer. This presentation has been prepared by Seyfarth Shaw LLP for informational purposes only. The material discussed during this webinar should not be construed as legal advice or a legal opinion on any specific facts or circumstances. The content is intended for general information purposes only, and you are urged to consult a lawyer concerning your own situation and any specific legal questions you may have. And with that, I will turn it over to Dave Baffa. Dave, please go ahead.
Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you joining us. My name is Dave Baffa. I'm a partner in our Chicago office. I head up our counseling group nationally and co-chair our employment litigation group within the L&E department. And really pleased to be joining you today, along with a great group of folks I'll let introduce themselves. Chantel?
Hello, everyone. My name is Chantel Egan. I'm a partner in our San Francisco office. I work quite a bit with Dave in leading our counseling group, as well as I do not only my own investigations, but I do quite a bit of training with investigations, and I'm also have an active litigation practice, and in the last couple of years I've had quite a few cases where defense of the investigation has been a key focal point of the litigation. And I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Jay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jay Philstrap, and I'm an associate in the L&E department in our Atlanta office. My practice consists of a lot of single plaintiff litigation, as well as counseling and workplace investigations and wage and hour work. And I'm happy to be joined with these other three colleagues of mine.
Thanks very much, Jade. My name is Anne Marie Zalatel, and I am a partner in our Los Angeles office, and I spend 100% of my time doing employment advice and counseling. And in recent years, a big chunk of my practice has involved both conducting investigations as well as guiding human resources professionals and outside investigators through the investigation process. And with that, I will turn it back to Dave.
Thanks, everybody. So I thought we'd just briefly go over the agenda, but not spend much time here. You know, if you've joined us, you know it's the whole premise of this whole approach here is that each of us has plenty of investigation experience, I imagine, certainly this panel and probably many of you on the call. But, you know, what none of us has a lot of experience with is dealing with investigations in this COVID-19 remote work sort of environment. And so we really wanted to use this time to really think about how does the use of video technology and remote investigation sort of impact sort of our normal framework for doing investigation. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that premise again. We'll talk a little bit about some of the advantages and disadvantages of conducting remote interviews. Talk about, you know, the mechanics of how do my instructions change, what kind of different logistics do I need to think about, and a little bit on how to build rapport and some of the technical considerations that go into investigations. So on the next slide, you'll see that we kind of laid out a framework. Again, really, this is not the subject really of today's session, but I wanted to try to put it in context. You've probably, hopefully, you've been to other investigations training that our firm has put on, workshops. As you know, you can spend multiple days in workshops and lots of investigation training experience, and there's always things to learn. But, you know, in the context of a good process, we're really going to zero in here on the middle, which is the investigation interview, and how that's impacted in particular by this environment. Just, you know, I'll briefly walk through these these stages of investigation since it's up here for context. But in our view, you know, a good overall process is one where you, of course, first have to receive or intake the complaint, recognize it for what it is, and raise it to the right people in the organization. Interesting topic, perhaps, to think about whether that's changed in this environment of remote working. The next box talks about reviewing and reacting, and really that's a reference to situations where you've got to do something immediately. Just on the fact of the complaint, someone needs to be removed, separated, potentially put out of the workplace. Of course, we're all out of the workplace while you look into it. Respond is really the reference to what we're going to focus on today, this sort of building the investigation interview, the process, the steps, the questions, and actually conducting the witness interviews. Report and remediation, of course, is, you know, the best way to document reports. We're going to talk a little bit about note-taking, recording, and some of the ways that changes in this environment in terms of that output. And then reassess is really a reference to reminder of the fact that a lot of times with investigations we see employers skip the step of the kind of lessons learned. What do I need to do now to go back to revisit policies or processes? Depending on the nature of the complaint, is there something here that we should be improving to make sure that these kind of complaints don't continue? And then reconnecting. You know, in situations where you're dealing with current employees or somebody who got a real slap on the wrist or other disciplinary action, it's important to sort of reconnect with those folks and make sure that you are mindful about turning back to see how they're doing, checking in and really calendaring those events. So again, we're going to really focus today on, on the respond phase, but I wanted to kind of give you the overall framework of an investigation process before we jump in. Okay, so again, more setup. Next slide. You know, the reason we wanted to put this program on is I don't want to say we're going to be remote work and video conferencing forever, but it's likely that this will remain commonplace even after the pandemic's over. I mean, every provider of the technology to do these webinars is chasing the latest, greatest tools and tricks and investments. Everybody's upgrading their software, their capability in this space. All the vendors are competing for your time over video conferencing. And there's no reason to think that's all going to go away. That technology is going to continue to improve. 5G is right around the corner. You know, I think even when folks are back to face-to-face meetings and we're all sort of comfortably back in offices, this kind of experience is going to persist. In fact, there was just a survey out this morning from Cushman & Wakefield suggesting that 50% of sort of the huge workforce that they polled isn't making any plans to come back anytime soon. Even if you do get back to an in-person meeting world, the last place I'd suggest you're going to want to be in the immediate future is sitting in a cramped little conference room right across the table from a witness. It's not a situation where you can really wear masks. I think it's important to be able to read the person's expression and see their face and see their reaction. It's hard to, can't really do that with a mask. And that'd be, I would say, in the scheme of face-to-face in-person meetings, that's going to be a lag, not a lead. And so we just need to make sure that we're better at this, that we add or improve the skill of really conducting remote investigations. And so that's where we're going to put our focus. So I'm going to ask, there really are some advantages, I think, to doing investigations over this kind of platform. There are, of course, some disadvantages. I thought we'd have Chantel take you through those briefly, and then I'll come back with a little bit more setup about the beginning of the process.
Mm-hmm. So as Dave said, I mean, this is really something that is probably going to be becoming more of a reality, even separate and apart from COVID-19. There are some key advantages to proceeding with an investigation in this way, and I would say that the people on this panel, as well as many of the people listening in today, have quite a bit of experience with investigations, tend to conduct investigations in person, But now that we're in a position where video conferencing is one of the primary ways that we're going to be able to, we need to push forward investigations, there actually are some advantages for us to, take stock in and even consider as we move forward with being able to do in-person investigations again. One of the big ones that jumped out for me as someone who does a lot of investigations in Silicon Valley is this really solves the where to conduct the investigation dilemma. Very frequently when I'm conducting investigations or leading a client through the process of conducting their own investigation, one of the struggles that we have is an open floor plan. There's limited conference space. In essence, everybody knows everything that's happening in the workplace at any time, including even if you have the luxury of having an office space off-site, they see someone leave and they want to know, why did Bob have to, leave in the middle of the day? He never goes out and gets lunch. This really helps us eliminate that problem. We don't have to look for meeting space. There's a cost savings there. Eliminates the need for conference room, and I'm sure many of you have been in that situation where you're jockeying for conference room space, and then when you finally get it, you have somebody out, out the door because they've timed it, and you really need to wrap up your investigation interview that day because someone else has the room at 2 o'clock. So it really eliminates that need. Likewise, it would promote confidentiality and potentially also relieve some fear as to retaliation because you don't have to make that grand exit. No one's going to see you in the conference room. No one's going to see you leaving the office. This is all going to be done outside of work. Likewise, recently there's quite a bit of travel expenses and logistics associated with investigations. I had a situation, for example, where in 48 hours it was very important for us to get the information from people in 3 different states right away. So I was on a plane crisscrossing the country, making sure that I could have an in-person interview with individuals very quickly. Video conference would solve for that problem. Something that took 48 hours and quite a bit of travel expense and time and logistics could be eliminated by simply being able to hop on a video conference. Likewise, it enables for easier scheduling. If someone wants to meet with you early in the morning before their day begins so they're not distracted, or late in the evening, this is especially true when we're thinking about, as we're all trying to manage our new reality with COVID, you could have somebody, for example, who has caretaking responsibilities, and it's a lot easier for them to meet with you early in the day or late at night, and video conferencing helps alleviate that issue. Likewise, going back to this kind of scheduling issue, if you're in a situation where a large volume of interviews need to happen, video conferencing could help you conduct those interviews in a shorter amount of time. Not only is it going to eliminate the travel aspect of it, but it's much easier to schedule interviews going back to back because you won't have the situation where one interviewee sees another interviewee leaving, and it once again goes back to that confidentiality piece, helping you keep things confidential, helping you schedule multiple interviews in a short amount of time, which obviously would be promoting the promptness prong that we all want to encourage with interviews in the investigation context. Additionally, and one of the other things that could be a real benefit is if you're the type of investigator that wants to bring in a note taker, for example, so that you can 100% engage with the person you're interviewing. This is a way to do it in a way that is not intimidating. For example, you can even set up your software so that the note taker is not visible, perhaps introduces themselves, but then you take them off screen and you can just focus on having a one-on-one conversation with the person being interviewed. Likewise, for very large-scale cultural audits or investigations, if one particular person is really central to the investigation, but because of the volume, there is a need to have multiple investigators. This is a potential opportunity for multiple investigators to participate in the interview, potentially even as just observers, with once again not having that potentially intimidating environment of having multiple people in one room. but really alleviating that sense of stress that could come for having so many people physically together that is potentially eliminated by having it be virtual. The one other thing that I would mention is the complex documents. For those of you that have done litigation, you've certainly had that situation when you're in a deposition, and it's a real struggle because you are trying to make a spreadsheet make sense in a static exhibit. This gives you an opportunity to share your screen or have the interviewee share their screen and actually walk you through the document, or a document that is a living, breathing document, like a spreadsheet where you want to use filtering or pivot tables, or if there's a video and you want to be able to watch it together. This enables you to do so in a way that is very streamlined and gives you a lot more power over the investigation, the interview, I should say. But there are some disadvantages, and we're going to go over those in the next slide. So it's definitely going to be challenging to develop a human connection. I'm sure we all have been here. I mean, I feel like we're getting a little bit more used to communicating in this way. But for those of you that have been doing this for a long time, part of how you set the stage and put someone at ease is, you're controlling the room. You are making sure that you are really interacting with that person so that they trust you and will be honest and forthright with you. So there is some challenges with the technology in that way, making eye contact and things of that nature. Likewise, there could be some struggles with assessing credibility because although we are close to one another, it is not the same as being in the same room as somebody. You're not going to be able to see necessarily them fidgeting with their hands or a nervous tick that is outside the visibility of the screen. And just as I mentioned earlier, how it's, can be really helpful with, a complex exhibit. If you have a lot of documents to show somebody, it can end up being a little bit clunky and slow. And it also could be a situation where, you could perhaps, take a break previously, but now you're watching the person reading it on the screen. There's just some limitations in terms of it really just being a streamlined experience. Likewise, just as an investigator, you're going to need to be very organized on the front end to make sure that you are able to share your exhibits with ease. The inability to control the interview space is something that is also very important. I mean, that's not just putting the interview at ease, but it also is a way for you to really make sure that they have your complete and total focus and that there is no other distractions. And frankly, that is something that is very difficult to manage on in an interview format that is via video. There's also going to be potentially some unique wage and hour considerations, especially for states like California. So for example, as I mentioned earlier, if you have somebody who, it makes a lot more sense for them to meet early with you, then that could be outside their regular working hours. And for an hourly employee, it is really important that they are being compensated for that time. Likewise, there could also be equipment deficits. We can't start from the assumption that everybody in every interview has a computer to do video conferencing or that has a smartphone that enables them to do video conferencing from the starting point. And then even if they do, if you have a situation where somebody does not normally work from home and have any kind of reimbursement for that, in a place like California, you may need to reimburse them during the period of the investigation for use of their cell phone, use of their internet service. And these are things that you'd want to flesh out depending on who the interviewee pool is. There's just potentially going to be some, COVID-related sensitivities. This is certainly a time when individuals have a lot going on other than work. And being able to navigate that in an investigation, especially when you're trying to do things promptly, making sure that, any kind of health issue that they have, that they're caring for someone else, as well as child care obligations, all of that is going to impact your ability to conduct an investigation that is, both prompt and thorough, and also uninterrupted. Because frankly, I'm sure all of you have had an experience so far, with the dog barking, with the child running in the room. There could be certainly things that are distracting to the interviewee and the interviewer that are unique to our current situation with the pandemic.
Thanks,
and
Chantel.
so with that, I'm going to...
Yeah, so I thought I'd pick up on just some key considerations here as you get started. And in process, I think I'll be picking up a couple of questions that I've seen pop up from folks. If you have questions, feel free to type them in, and we'll see if we can get to those either during the flow or at the end. Just to set the stage here, and we're going to go into a lot of detail on some of these, but obviously you need to think about what video conferencing software you intend to use. It is important to make sure that you're able to maintain eye contact with the witness at all times, so that if you do share a document or you do put something up on the screen, that doesn't break. There are ways to pin the participant's video so that they're always at the top, to make sure that you're always visible on the screen, so that you don't lose that ability to gauge reactions or to see people. Of course, we'll even talk a little bit later about making sure you're positioned in a way that you can see the person to make sense. We've all been on video conferences where people sit entirely too close or they're looking somewhere else, and we're not, that's not something you want to have happen here, and it's okay to correct the witness in that situation. See what I did there? Now, when it's time to share documents, remember, and Chantel's alluded to this, really need to think about what you've got and how you're going to share them, and what technology will the witness have. This isn't, if you're planning to sort of share documents or show things and they're off using their cell phone or their smartphone, that's not going to work. So you can see already that there's a need to do some sort of pre-scheduling logistics to understand what technology they're going to have, to really think about whether, are you sharing spreadsheets, are you sharing things that really need to be read ahead of time, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide too. And then we'll also get some tips here on ways that your instructions will change as well. And then someone's already asked the question, and I think it's a good one. All of these web service technologies have the ability to record, and interestingly, it would be kind of a weird, scary thing if you were in an investigation interview and recording it. I think maybe some practitioners will do that. I think most of us tend toward not wanting to record. And likewise, in this environment, it's a lot easier to record, but I still think that for the most part, I think most of our attorneys and our folks would sort of steer you away from actually recording the investigation interview. And there's a few reasons for that. It kind of depends on the purpose of the interview and what you're going after. But remember, somebody that feels like they're being recorded, usually in an investigation, you're trying to get people to open up, to establish rapport, to be forthcoming. And when you're recording it, that is sometimes harder to pull off. Likewise, as long as you've got a good system for taking notes, or maybe you have a note taker that is taking notes for you, that is generally all the kind of evidence you need. If it's a situation where an attorney is doing the interviewing, you can sort of maintain your notes as work product. If you did get into litigation about the sufficiency of an investigation, or there was a question about what somebody said, sometimes maybe it would save you to have a recording of the actual interview. But I think most of the time you'd find yourself on the wrong side of a lot of second guessing, judgment, tearing apart. Why didn't you ask this? Why didn't you ask that? Well, eventually you'll have lawyers going through your recorded interview and sort of pointing out what should have been done differently or done better, if your investigation is the kind that's going to lead to litigation. So I'm not saying you'd never want to record it, but I think you'll hear, us sort of assume through this presentation that generally you're not going to take advantage of that opportunity to record. Someone asked the question already about note-taking as well. or about sharing a document. You know, in life, real life, you put a document in front of somebody and then you take it back. Really, in this environment, you can do the same thing. You know, if I will be sharing some videos and documents just even as part of this webinar and then taking them back. Now, you do have to be careful somebody's not taking screenshots or recording. We'll talk about that too. But in general, you do have the ability, obviously, when you're sharing documents, to just take them back. And then on the next slide, talk a little bit more about some of those exhibit considerations. And you know, it is possible to use, if you plan ahead, you can use a secure file transfer capability, something like a Kiteworks or I know that's what we use, Dropbox. There's other sort of services out there that allow you to share essentially a cloud folder with documents and things in it, where you actually can monitor who has access and what they do with it. You can restrict downloading. You can prevent things from being printed. It can be a view-only sort of situation that makes it difficult for somebody to kind of run off with your materials, but have the chance to read them in advance, particularly if they require advanced preparation. You know, thinking about what you're sharing and how to do it is important. You know, video files, we're going to actually, in a moment, I'm going to share a video file with you. And you should know that, you know, when you do that, you have to set it up in a certain way to still get audio from that file. So there, and that's true really in WebEx. It's also true in Zoom and other platforms as well. So knowing some of those kinks and issues, you know, this is something where you need to practice and try a few things out before you go live, as we have done, although, of course, things can always go wrong. With that set up, Mike, why don't you roll the first clip? I want to show you an example of sharing a document during an investigation. Instead of just talking about it, we thought we'd intersperse some clips of one of our presenters, Chantel, giving you a sense of what that looks like.
So before we started our meeting today, you sent me some copies of text messages and emails that you wanted me to review before our meeting. I'm going to share my screen right now because I want to share a couple of those documents with you. Do you recognize this text message?
I do.
Can you tell me about it?
It's a screenshot of the text exchange I had with Bob after I left the meeting because of the jokes that he was making that made me leave.
And do you have any other text messages between you and Bob that are similar to this?
No, just these.
And why is it that you decided to take a screenshot of these text messages?
I just wanted somebody to have proof so I could show somebody, because I knew nobody would believe me that it was happening.
Great. Thank you for that.
Okay, so I think our video feeds will pop back here, but hopefully you saw there that, you know, the ability to share something like a text or files, you know, if you plan ahead and prepare, it actually can be as powerful as sliding it across the table or, you know, gauging somebody's reaction. So just thinking in advance about what those things, how that dynamic will flow will play well for you. Thanks, Chantel. There will be other snippets like that that we'll intersperse here in the program. We thought we'd try to show rather than tell where we could. And thanks especially to our witness actor, friend of Chantel's especially. So I think I'm going to turn it over now, talk a little bit more about some of the communications and prep to Anne-Marie. Just take it away.
There's some additional logistics for you. First, a couple of things you want to think about are the pre- and post-interview communications with the witness. You know, both phone and email communications. With email, hopefully those working remotely have work email, and you do want to instruct the witness to be sure to use his or her work email account if that is available, rather than a personal account, especially if you are going to invoke the attorney-client privilege to protect the investigation. Personal email should only be used as a last resort, and if the witness is using personal email, again, because he or she doesn't have a work account, you want to confirm with the witness that the witness is the only person who has access to the account. For example, you don't want the witness using the family email account that the spouse or partner and kids also have access to. And you want to instruct the witness to label any communications with counsel as confidential attorney-client privilege. That way, assuming you do invoke the privilege, those email communications will be protected. Otherwise, if either they're not labeled or the witness, it's a joint email account, there is an argument that you've waived the privilege. Also, we always have a witness pre-call, but in the remote setting, there are a couple of additional tasks to accomplish during the pre-call. The first is to, of course, confirm that, as Dave mentioned, you'll first want to decide which software you will be using and make sure that the witness has the software properly installed. But then you also want to have a call to confirm that the software actually was installed properly and is in fact working. Also, you want to confirm that the camera and sound quality. And I recommend that you do this in a pre-call, so once the day of the interview and the interview time comes, you can jump right in and things hopefully go more smoothly, especially if you've scheduled interviews closely together. You don't want to be delayed. Next slide, please. I want to talk about some additional preliminary instructions that are required in the remote setting. The first is no recording, and while you also, even in a live interview, confirm with a witness that he or she is not recording the interview and advise the witness that you are not doing so either. This becomes much more important in a remote setting because you, quite frankly, it's much more difficult to tell if the witness is recording or filming the interview. So you want to first advise the witness that you are not recording the interview, and secondly, explain to the witness that the company does not consent. This is especially important in states where two-party consent is required for recording. To go on the record to state that the company, neither you nor the company consents to the witness recording the interview. And then also just to confirm that the witness is not and will not be recording the interview. And with that, I am going to ask our tech expert to play a little snippet that demonstrates an example of this instruction.
Even though we are doing this investigation virtually today, all the same rules for investigations continue to apply, all our same protocols and procedures. Because of that, I am not recording this meeting today. Do you mind confirming that you are also not recording this meeting?
I'm not, and I want to say thank you for bringing that up because I thought maybe you were recording and I didn't know either. So thank you, I appreciate that, and I am not recording.
Okay, good. The company wants to keep this investigation confidential, well, rather as confidential as possible. And as part of keeping our communications confidential, that is why neither you nor I will record this conversation. I will be taking notes, so if at times it looks like I'm looking down or I'm not responding right away, it's simply because I'm taking notes.
Okay.
Chantal, as you saw, she also mentioned, that she would be taking notes, which, of course, you definitely want to do. If you could move to the next slide, or back one. Oh, just back one, please. you want to keep in mind, when you are conducting a remote investigation, because you're not in the same room as the witness, you have less assurance that the witness is not recording later on, is not disregarding your instructions. And so what should you do if during the course of the interview you have a sneaking suspicion that the witness has maybe tried to or has disregarded your instruction? I'm now going to play another clip that shows you how you address the issue of potential recording.
Who else was present when Bob made those comments to you? Hey, excuse me, I'm seeing your cell phone. Are you recording?
Oh, yeah, I just want to have a record of what's being said here. It's,
yeah. As we said at the outset of this investigation, we are treating this investigation as confidential as possible, and it's for that reason that I am not recording and neither are you, and we both agreed to those terms at the beginning of this video conference. Please stop recording and delete the file.
okay.
Confirm for me once it's deleted.
Delete file. File deleted.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Do you agree not to record?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so just you saw that as Chantel, as soon as she saw the cell phone in the corner of the screen, was really quick to jump in and ask the witness if he was recording. So it's just important in this setting to be on alert for cues and other things that you might see in the corner of your screen. So the next instruction is definitely also very important and something that does not come up. Actually, if you could go back to the prior slide, the instruction that nobody else should be present. Obviously, if you're conducting the interview in person, you know if other people are in the room with you. That is not always the case, and really, never the case when the investigation interview is being done remotely, because someone could easily be just outside of the camera view, and they could be sitting there the entire time, and you would never know it. Also, given that most people are working out of their homes where they may have kids or other family members present, you're more likely to have other people in earshot of the interview, even if they aren't in the same room. So you do want to confirm with the witness that the fact that the interview is confidential means that no one else may be either present in the room or otherwise within earshot, and ask the witness to let you know if at any point during the interview someone either comes into the room or is in the next room and now within earshot, so that you may take steps to protect the confidentiality of the investigation. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Other instructions that become especially important in the remote setting. The first is no multitasking. It's really tempting, I know from personal experience, when you're on a call, to be checking email, responding to email. It's easy to get distracted. So you want to advise the witness that you expect that the witness will devote his or her full attention to the interview. And also in this setting, I would ask the witness to close out of all other applications on their computer, so they won't be distracted by the email pop-up or voicemail pop-up. You also want to ask the witness to adjust the screen camera position so that you and the witness can make eye contact, and they're not somewhere sitting in the corner where it's hard to read their expression and otherwise any verbal cues that they may be sending you with their answers. Finally, I think speaking ground rules become more important, and in particular, the request that the witness agree, that the two of you agree that there will be a brief pause between when one person is speaking before the other person jumps in, just to account for any video delay or technical issues, so you're not talking over each other. And with that, we'll move to the next slide. So these instructions on this slide are actually common to all investigations, whether the investigation is being done remotely or not. The first, of course, is the obligation to tell the truth, the fact that you expect the witness to provide complete and accurate information, and only answer that he or she doesn't know if, in fact, that is a true answer. Also, some good news: at the end of 2019, the NLRB overruled Banner Health Systems, and that's the decision a few years back that held, where the NLRB held that a complete requirement of confidentiality during investigations violates both represented as well as non-represented employees' rights to engage in concerted protected activity. The NLRB overruled that decision at the end of December of 2019, and so we now have the ability to insist upon confidentiality, which is a great thing, because the NLRB's position is now consistent with the EEOC's position, and really does, I think, in my experience, encourage employees who have been subject to harassment in particular to come forward if they know that their complaints are confidential to the extent possible, and are assured that information will be shared only on a need-to-know basis, and they're not going to have other employees who don't have a need-to-know gossiping or either otherwise interfering with the investigation through leaks or by divulging evidence. So that is an important instruction and some good news in 2020. And then finally, of course, you want to remind the witness that the company strictly prohibits retaliation against any individual for either making a complaint and or for participating and cooperating in the investigation. It's also really important with this instruction to explain to the witness that he or she cannot engage in retaliation, and also that if the witness believes that that he or she is being subject to retaliation for participating in the investigation, the name and the telephone number of the person that the witness is to contact to report that perceived retaliation, so that that perceived retaliation can be investigated. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Chantel.
Big question is, can we actually create a human connection in an interview that is via video conference? And that is really one of the pillars of a strong investigator, is that in a short amount of time, the investigator can build trust with the individuals that he or she is interviewing, and can solicit truthful, accurate information from those individuals. And part of that is really connecting with those individuals. So, of course, we're all fearful, how can we do that if it's through this remote means? I think we also, knowing that most of us right now are working from home or in some kind of remote place, that just showing gratitude for the person welcoming you into their home. I mean, we've all been in situations where, you are you can see someone's bedroom in the background. I've had conversations with people who are hiding in their cars because that's the quietest place they can find. As everyone on this panel knows, I spend a lot of time hiding in my basement. And so, really just expressing gratitude that they've allowed you into their personal space. And also just acknowledging that we're going to have interruptions in a way that's different than how we were doing it if we were in person. And frankly, using those interruptions, whether it's, the dog barking, the kid interrupting, asking for a snack, or technical glitches, because frankly, we've all experienced those where the audio is not working, the camera's glitching in and out. Use those as a way to neutralize the interview and develop the human connection and to really see each other as two people in a way to solicit accurate and thorough information. You want to be thinking about how you appear on the screen, how the interviewee is perceiving you. And obviously, you have the box that you can see yourself in, but really making sure that you are engaging with the camera so that there is eye contact and being thoughtful about how you look to the interviewee as you write your notes. So for example, if you're someone who does handwriting, but knowing that you're writing, facing down, letting them know that's what's happening ahead of time. Also, if you're somebody that does a lot of typing of your notes and you're not using the same screen, it could look that you're looking off the other way and you're not interested or engaged. So thinking about maybe what is the best way for you to take your notes in a way that makes sure that you continue to have that high level of engagement. Likewise, just as you would in an in-person interview, think about how you dress. So, if you're going in and you're interviewing someone that works in a more casual environment, and we're all a little bit more casual now that we're at home, you're going to want to make sure that you are presenting yourself in a way that they can connect with you, and they won't find you intimidating. Likewise, thinking about how you can just actively engage with the interviewee. Very similar to how you would be doing this in person, but just repeating back to them what they've said, asking, making sure that you understand what they've said, and if it's putting it into your words to ensure that you have accurate communication. That type of active listening is really integral in a video type setting. Additionally, just starting off with a conversational style that's a little bit more informal can help you develop a rapport from the outset of the conversation. It also gives you the flexibility to change your tone and demeanor as needed. For example, somebody commented, oh, you were a lot nicer than I would have been during the video when you caught the individual recording. Obviously, you're going to want to temper it based on the situation at hand. But for example, if you need to become stern or you're showing a document that is very powerful and you need, for example, the person that's been accused, you need a very direct response from them and the person's being evasive. If you start informally and in a casual way, it allows you to use your tone of voice in order to convey through your demeanor that you need to get a very accurate answer from this person, and that you don't mean any monkey business. And it's harder to do that because you can't really do that with body language, but you certainly can use your tone. If we could go to the next slide. This is that code that you all are going to need in order to get CLE credit. It's SS as in Seyfarth Shaw 3431. Once again, SS 3431. Make sure you write that down so that you can get credit. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Jade.
Thanks, Chantel. I'm going to talk about some of the key technical considerations. Obviously one of the unavoidable but very manageable disadvantages of remote investigation is the technology aspect of it. When you're doing in-person interviews, you obviously don't have to worry about whether or not you can be seen or you can be heard, and all the different nuances with screen sharing and things like that. But with proper preparation, you can avoid some of the headaches that we've all likely experienced with having to deal with technology. So one thing that's really important, and probably something you haven't had to spend a lot of time thinking about, is your home internet speed. You know, now that we're in this remote world and a lot of people are working from home, that's something that's pretty critical in terms of having a smooth remote investigation. So speed, 1.5 megabytes or higher is recommended to make sure that your Wi-Fi signal strength is high enough so that you can do smooth video conferencing. And a lot of times you'll see, you know, in situations where you might have poor connection or calls drop when you're on, you know, whatever platform you might be using, that could be impacted by having slow internet speed. So that's something that you're going to want to work with your IT department if you're like me and your technological skills are limited at best. It might not be something that you're aware of or you even know how to find out, but you should definitely check in with your internal IT department. And to the extent that that's not possible, you could also check with your internet provider, and they should be able to tell you whether or not you have proper internet speed and a high enough internet speed so that you can smoothly do video conferencing. And this is something that you're going to want to do well in advance of the interview. It's obviously not something you're going to want to try to figure out the day of, because at that point it's going to be too late. It's also really important when you're figuring out where you want to set up your interview, that you know where your internet router is. Also something that we don't really have to think about. If you're in in a conference room or in the office, at least for me, I'm not concerned about where the internet router is, and that's not top of mind for me. But if you're working from home and remotely, it's really important that you're close enough to wherever your router is so that you have good internet strength. So this may require that for planning purposes, you think about, where is there a private place that's going to be quiet in your home or wherever you're handling the interview from, that's going to be close enough to that router that your signal is going to be strong enough in order for you to have a good connection. And it's not always possible, and can be a little old school, but it's actually really beneficial to the extent that you can connect an Ethernet cord to your router. That will actually give you pretty good internet signal, and then you don't have to worry about some of the Wi-Fi problems that you might otherwise have. So to the extent that you can get an Ethernet cord and plug that directly into the router, that's a good idea, and that can reduce problems as well. Also a consideration when you're working at home with Wi-Fi is how many people are at your house or wherever you are that are connected to whatever Wi-Fi you're using. So to the extent that you can bump off your kids or your significant other or have a designated signal that you're using for your interview, that would be preferable, because the more people that are connected, that could also impact the speed of your Wi-Fi. So that's just something to consider. And then, of course, we have to plan for the unexpected. To the extent that you have a Wi-Fi hotspot, it might be good just to have that on reserve to the extent that you have power outages. I know I've been on calls and have been on a phone interview and been taking notes on my computer, and the power went out. And that's just a very unexpected and also frustrating thing to have to deal with when you're in the middle of a video conference, because it can be very distracting and difficult to get back. And if you have to wait for your Wi-Fi to come back on, then that could be problematic. So to the extent that you have a Wi-Fi hotspot, that might be something else to consider having as backup. We can go on to the next slide. And I think I've actually covered this, so we can actually skip on to the next one. So in terms of, we can go back one more. There we go, perfect. So in terms of maximizing audio and video quality, so this is something that you're going to want to do well in advance of your investigation. And we've talked about this before. Obviously, a key ingredient to having a successful remote investigation is quality audio and video. So that means you're going to want to check your audio feed, your video feed well in advance of the video conference. And you can do that, working with your IT department, or even having a colleague. It might be good. We talked about doing a practice run. it might be good to do a practice run with a colleague just to make sure that, at least on your end, all the audio and the visual problems, you can work those out well in advance so that you're not wasting time when it's actually go time for your interview. Another thing that you might consider doing when you're actually conducting the interview is using headphones. And that will help reduce some of the feedback that you might hear in the background. You know, sometimes it's unavoidable. You might have pets in the background. Somebody might be mowing the lawn, you know, outside your window or something like that, and just having the headphones can help reduce that background noise. Something also that we might not think about is lighting, and that's really important. It goes towards building rapport, and it's just really important that you're able to see the witness and that the witness is able to see you. Because when you're in a situation where you're doing video and somebody has really bad lighting, one, that can be very distracting. You don't want to have somebody squinting to see, you. You just want to have a bright area to the extent that you have a window. You can go somewhere where there's a window, or, you can turn on lights to help with the lighting. That's very preferable too. And then in terms of just the quality of the video, also, it's important to minimize any pop-ups that might happen, particularly if you're sharing screens. To the extent that you need to share documents and you're sharing screens, you don't want to have pop-ups going off in the background while you're speaking with your witness. And this can also help minimize any type of interruptions with the video speed as well in the streaming. So, you want to be able to reduce freezing. So closing out any unnecessary background notifications, pop-ups, things like that, that's very helpful too. You can go to the next slide. So we talked about this a bit, positioning of your camera to make sure that, you have good eye contact, you're maintaining visibility on the screen. And that's very important for building rapport, and also because you want to make sure that you can see the witness and that the witness can see you, and that to the extent that there's anything going on to the side, that you're able to see that. So sometimes this can be difficult to the extent that you're taking notes, but it's important for you to position your camera in a way that you're looking at the actual camera and not looking at the witness. Sometimes that can create a situation where you have shifty eyes. So there's ways where you can do that, and during your practice run, it should be easy for you to kind of practice doing that, figuring out what works best for you to the extent that you are note-taking, that, you might want to consider having double screens, if that's an option for you, to use double screens so that you can still have the witness visible and you can be typing at the same time, if that's a possibility for you. Let's go to the next slide. I've talked about note-taking. I want to be mindful of our time, so I'm running through. We actually had another clip that we were going to show, but I'm going to skip it so we can just run through this last slide. We talked about sharing documents a little bit, and what's important for that is, when you're going through your practice run, especially if it's your first time, doing a remote interview, it's really important to practice how you're going to do document sharing in real time, because that can really slow down your interview, and we want to make sure that, you can work out any kinks. You want to make sure that you're showing the document in a way that's visible to the witness, and that you're also able to maintain eye contact with the witness and visibility of the witness while you're doing so. So when you're thinking about what platform you want to use, it's definitely important for you to consider which platforms have the capability for you to do that. And it's also important for you to consider whether or not it's appropriate for you to do, how you want to share your documents. Is screen sharing appropriate? Are there things on your screen that you don't want the witness to see? So those are just things that you want to be mindful of, and you obviously want to be mindful of just keeping organized. So you might consider numbering your exhibits that you're going to share, just so you can, expedite that process and keep things moving fairly quickly. And with that, I'm going to kick it back to, we have one more slide. Just to wrap it up, obviously it's just important to be prepared for mishaps. It's a new world that we're living in, and things happen, so you want to just make sure that you leave time at the beginning and you build in time with your witness so that you're not scheduling interviews back to back because, you know, especially if you're doing this for the first time, things can happen and unexpected things can happen. So you want to make sure you build in some time at the beginning and at the end to kind of wrap up the session, account for any technological issues that you might happen so that you're not running into time issues. And then, of course, at the beginning of the interview, it's always a great idea to get the telephone number of the witness so that to the extent that you lose connection, that you have a means of calling the witness and getting back going. With that, I will kick it back to Dave to close this out.
Jade, thank you very much, and thanks, Chantel and Anne-Marie. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I think we got to your questions. I've been sort of answering privately, but we're out of time here, but we really appreciate it. Thanks. We tried to do some technological feats today, which I think worked for most. I know a couple of people had problems, but we appreciate your patience, and thanks for the feedback. Kelly, take us away.
Thank you, Dave. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for attending.